Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I'm Satish Thakur, Chair of Canada-India Foundation, and on behalf of Canada-India Foundation, I welcome you all to a very special edition of our virtual speaker series. Today, we have a long-time friend of Canada-India Foundation, a visionary leader, Honorable Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, with us as the main speaker. As a federal minister of immigration in Stephen Harper's government, he had brought a more transparent and effective immigration policy that saw the number of qualified legal immigrants rise to the record levels. Kenney was and still is an extremely popular figure among the cultural communities of Canada, with a deep understanding of what drives the immigrant dreams. As Alberta's premier, Kenney continued to be engaged with all the diverse communities in the province, including a substantial section of its hardworking and entrepreneurial Indo-Canadian community. Alberta is going through some of the most difficult challenges in its history, but inspirational leadership of Premier Kenney has kept the hopes of a revival alive among its citizens. Alberta was the key factor in Canada's economic recovery during the 90s and early part of the new century, and under Premier Kenney's able leadership, the province may yet regain its preeminent position soon. Friends, our strategy of engaging with people and stakeholders on the social, cultural, and political levels, we call this the 360-degree approach, has helped our core objective of strengthening bilateral ties between Canada and India. And our progress is also a reflection of over 1.6 million Indian diaspora resident here, who with their hard work and integrity help create a wonderful image of India in Canada every day and make us all proud. Our community came together in summer months to mount a humanitarian effort that saw the distribution of approximately 20,000 hot fresh vegetarian meals to frontline workers at various hospitals and other emergency services at Canada-India Foundation. And it was also the Indian diaspora that demanded a better appreciation of the 6,000-year-old holistic system of medicine, often referred to as the mother of all medical sciences. Here in Canada, we have an ongoing virtual Ayurveda speaker series where some of the world's most renowned experts present a compelling case on the benefits of Ayurveda, including its cost effectiveness at a time of soaring healthcare budgets. I might add that Ayurveda has shown some of the promising results in the fight of COVID-19 pandemic. Friends, CIF is growing in many directions, and we have plans to open a chapter in India soon. And we hope, as a result, we'll be able to offer better services to individual provinces here in Canada on how best to engage with India. We also will be holding our third healthcare forum in 2021 in partnership with University Health Network and FICCI in India. And this event will see coming together of some of the best minds working in the area of healthcare from both Canada and India. Starting early next year, we are also in the process of instituting scholarship for some of the bright young university students. While our program may impact different sections and sectors, our core focus remains democracies working together, a Canada-India relation that is in sync with each other. Friends, we are all keen to listen to Premier Kenney as Alberta holds many opportunities, not only for the rest of Canada, but for the businesses and professionals in India too. We at Canada-India Foundation will be happy to support and promote in every way in achieving the bold new vision for Alberta set by Premier, our Jason Bhai. Now I would like to invite our National Convener, Ritesh Malik, to introduce our speaker of this morning. Ritesh, over to you.
Thank you, Satish Bhai. Good morning and very warm welcome to all on this special webinar session today, featuring our very own Canadian Indian Jason Bhai, as Premier is lovingly known and addressed by most of the Indo-Canadians, and Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji himself. He started his public life in the early 1990s as president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and in 1997, at the age of 29, Calgary voters elected him to Parliament, where he was voted the best overall, hardest working, and the most knowledgeable member of Parliament by his colleagues in Maclean's magazine's annual survey. Premier Kenney served as Minister for Multiculturalism for 8 years in Prime Minister Harper's government. He became Canada's longest serving Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, welcoming over 1.3 million newcomers to Canada while implementing comprehensive reforms to Canada's immigration, refugee, and citizenship programs, leading the National Post to call him perhaps Canada's best immigration minister ever. From 2013 to 2015, Mr. Kenney served as Minister of Employment and Social Development, where he implemented a skills for job strategy. In 2015, he served as Minister for National Defense, deploying Canada's military to combat ICICI in the Middle East and to Ukraine to help modernize that country's defenses. In 2017, Mr. Kenney was elected leader of Alberta's Progressive Conservative Party with a mandate to reunite the province's divided free enterprise political movement. He then helped to lead the creation of the new United Conservative Party and was elected its leader, becoming leader of the opposition. In April 2019, he led his party to an election victory with 55% of the popular vote in a campaign focused on economic growth and advocating a fair deal for Alberta in the Canadian Federation. He was sworn in as Alberta's 18th Premier on April 30th, 2019. We look forward to hearing from you about your vision for Alberta and role we all can play to make that happen. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Ritesh. And by the way, I understand happy birthday is in order.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you, Satish. Thank you to the Canada-India Foundation for the invitation. It's so wonderful to be back amongst good friends, although virtually, and I hope that we can get reacquainted in person soon. As you know, I was at the very first founding meeting of the foundation. It would have been, I think, in 2006 in downtown Toronto, as we talked about the need for a strong, independent voice for the Canada-India relationship. Thank you to all of you who've contributed so much since then and continue to build on that vision. I should also start by saying Shubh Diwali, happy Diwali to all of you who have been celebrating this week. I know it's been probably a very different kind of celebration for obvious reasons, but still I hope that the joy and the light of Diwali has come to you and your families at this time. So at this very challenging time and uncertain time, we need organizations like the Canada-India Foundation to help point the direction towards prosperity. Our approach in Alberta towards the pandemic has been to protect both lives and livelihoods. Now, obviously, we've been challenged by the public health crisis, and most recently with the large spike in cases we're seeing across the Western world. But we've also been more deeply challenged by the economic crisis because not only has Alberta been impacted by this huge global economic contraction, the largest since the 1930s, but on top of that, by the largest ever collapse in energy prices for an economy that is very dependent on its energy sector. So the economic challenge has been deeper in Alberta, and that's why I and our government have been, I think, more focused than any in Canada on the path of economic resilience and recovery through the COVID crisis and beyond. And an essential part of that must be expanding our trade and investment relationships around the world. And for me, after the United States, which is by far Canada's and Alberta's largest trading partner, after the US, India should come next. And I believe there's a great opportunity for that, in part because One of the things that I believe is being clarified in the context of this global crisis is the role and nature of the Chinese Communist Party. And it is forcing a reassessment of foreign and policy and trade policy patterns of recent decades. And out of this should emerge a reality that I have been speaking of for 15 years, which is that India obviously is and should be our closest ally politically, strategically, and commercially in Asia, because of our shared values, our shared institutions, and our deep cultural ties. We have that here in Alberta. I know that most of the CIF supporters tend to be located in Ontario and British Columbia. I hope that you can develop a larger footprint here. In fact, I know that Deepak Ruparel was one of the very first supporters of the foundation, a great Alberta Desi entrepreneur. But I want you to know that we have over 200,000 Albertans of Indian origin who have been tremendous leaders in every walk of our society. You know, I'm proud to have in my cabinet Prasad Panditji, who of Telugu origin, but also a Mumbaiker, a brilliant structural engineer who helped to build the largest refinery in the world at Jamnagar in Gujarat, who is our Minister of Infrastructure. I'm proud to have Rajan Soni as our Minister of Community and Social Services, the proud daughter of Punjabi immigrants who really personifies the Canadian and the Alberta dream, who helped to, with her husband, create small oil and gas companies here in Alberta. I'm proud that our Lieutenant Governor is the first Canadian vice-regal representative of Desi origin, the Honorable Salma Lakhani of the Ismaili community, whose roots trace back to Gujarat, which of course is true also of our Mayor of Calgary. The last president of the University of Alberta was an Albertan of Indian Tamil origin, and I could go on, but this is a province with a unique culture of opportunity. It's an opportunity society. It is a meritocracy, I believe, more than any other part of Canada, where people are judged based on how hard they work and how well they treat others, not their last name or where they were born or how they pray. And that is why Alberta is a natural home for newcomers from India, more broadly from South Asia, and that is why they've done so well here. So that's an important part of our relationship. Listen, as I say, I believe that India should be at the very, very top of Canada's foreign and commercial policy as we emerge from the crisis. It is critically important for Alberta because India is the largest consumer of crude oil in the world. You know, we read and hear a lot about the energy transition, and there is an energy transition underway, and Alberta will be a key part of that. We drive an enormous amount of innovation to reduce the environmental impact of the energy sector and in so many other areas with massive investments from our energy companies. But at the same time, for decades to come, the world, particularly countries like India, in rapid growth, are going to require more traditional energy sources to fuel their growth, particularly the growth of the middle class. That is true more of India than elsewhere because of its because of its current dependence on coal-fired electricity, which, let me tell you a story. The very first time I met Narendra Modi was in 2008. I had persuaded Prime Minister Harper to commit to opening a Canadian trade office in Gujarat should we have been reelected in that 2008 federal campaign. And that was a way of getting Canada to take Gujarat off the blacklist, which had been the policy of G7 countries since 2002. And so I went over there and then met with then Chief Minister Modi ji. And the very first thing he said to me after thanking me for being the first G7 minister to visit Gujarat in nearly a decade, his very first comment to me was, "We need your natural gas." That was 13 years ago. Unfortunately, in Alberta, of course, we have the third largest oil reserves on Earth. We have the fifth largest natural gas reserves on Earth. I believe that's a good thing for the world, that we should have, that this liberal democracy with the highest labor, environmental, and human rights standards on Earth should have amongst the world's largest traditional energy reserves. The imperative for Canada and for the world, and including India, is that we get those resources to global markets. That's why you hear so much about the politics of pipelines, which affect us so directly. So I want to encourage the Canada-India Foundation, as part of your strategic efforts, to join the advocacy for energy infrastructure, for pipelines, for both Alberta's enormous reserves of crude oil, but also for our natural gas through LNG export opportunities. Because every additional barrel of Canadian crude that we can get to global markets, and every additional BCF of LNG that we can ship to global markets, is one less unit of energy that India has to depend from countries like Qatar, from countries whose strategic interests are often hostile to those of India, to countries that do not share the democratic and pluralistic values of India. Canada can and should be not just one of, but the most important source of energy for India if we can get that infrastructure built. So I strongly encourage my friends at the Canada-India Foundation to join the fight for the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and to understand our efforts as a government, as a province, and as a country to fight back against a campaign to landlock Canadian energy. That is why our government took a strategic investment in the Keystone XL pipeline to ensure its construction. It, of course, is facing political and legal impediments. It's why we're fighting efforts to shut down the Line 5 pipeline that's safely operated for 6 decades, which fuels much of the Ontario economy. There's an effort by the governor of Michigan to suspend that. It's why we are pushing hard against resistance to support the expansion of the Enbridge Line 3 project to the upper Midwest, and so much more. But it's also why it's so critically important that we get behind efforts like those of LNG Canada, that's a consortium led by Shell, to build the Coastal GasLink pipeline from northern British Columbia to the northwest BC coast. That would be the first major LNG export facility off of Canada's west coast, out of Canada altogether, and India could be the single largest market for that. So I want to be able to go back to India in the next 2 or 3 years and see my friend Prime Minister Modi ji and say, "You asked us to do this in 2007. We finally got it done. We are finally able to sign contracts with Indian energy importers to supply the fuel that can replace coal fire and that can displace OPEC sources of energy." So that I encourage the CIF to get behind. And not only is it important for India in terms of global security, to diversify its sources, let me say this, to democratize its energy sources, but it's also essential for Canada's prosperity. The single largest subsector of the Canadian economy has been oil and gas for the last 30, 40 years. 800,000 Canadian jobs are tied to that directly and indirectly. A recent study indicating $500 billion of government revenues over the past 20 years. That is the scale and importance of this. Our energy exports, even with significant constraints, without significant coastal access, our energy exports $100 billion a year. To put that in context for my friends from Ontario, that is more than twice the size of our automobile and automobile parts trade with the United States. So this is, as goes the energy sector, so goes the Canadian economy. This is essential for our balance of trade, for the value of our currency, for government revenues, for employment, and for so much more. Now, having said that, obviously, Alberta's economy continues to diversify. And back in June, we published Alberta's recovery plan. We were the first government in Canada, actually, to publish a comprehensive strategy for economic growth through and beyond the COVID crisis. And while emphasizing the importance of a strong future for our largest and historic industries like energy, we also have a number of policies to accelerate economic diversification. I want to share some of those with you because we intend to target India as a source of potential future investment, and the CIF and its members can help with that. So first of all, our recovery plan is a plan to build, to diversify, and to create tens of thousands of new jobs during this challenging time. At the center of it is making Alberta, actually strengthening Alberta's place as the most attractive jurisdiction in Canada and eventually North America for new business investment of all kinds. And our view as a government is the best approach is to create the optimal overall economic conditions for new business investment, as opposed to picking winners and losers. That is why our government, since coming to office 18 months ago, has reduced our general business tax rate, our corporate income tax rate, by 1/3. In fact, we accelerated that 1/3 reduction of business taxes in the midst of this crisis. I believe we are the only government, at least that I know of, in the world, to have been focused on encouraging new business investment in the future by reducing business taxes, while other governments are actually talking about higher taxes. Why are we doing that? Because under the previous government, the NDP government that preceded ours, they had raised business taxes to the average level, which was the same as Ontario's, the same as Quebec's, about 12 points for provincial income taxes, corporate income taxes. We realized the most impactful way to draw in new business investment was to reduce that rate. We've taken it from 12 down to 8, which means our combined rate with the federal is 23. That means we are substantially lower in our business taxes than any Canadian province, and we are lower than 44 of the 50 United States. In addition to which, we have lower income taxes than any Canadian province. We're the only Canadian province without a retail sales tax. And we have the best educated population in the country. We have the highest rate of post-secondary education. We have a flexible and available labor market, in part because of the high levels of unemployment right now, but remarkable skills. And many of those folks, unfortunately, are Albertans of Indian origin with tremendous levels of education who came here but have been displaced by 5 challenging years in the energy sector. They have great skills. We also have, we're accelerating our efforts, as I said, to diversify the economy. We've just introduced a new innovation jobs grant, we call it, which is the strongest incentive for startup companies in the innovation sector, like digital companies. And of course, there's obvious synergies with India in that respect. In fact, we have an Indian company just announced. It's called called Perfect Fit Systems, that's in the process of setting up in Calgary to apply advanced technologies to the textile manufacturing sector. So we are already seeing new investment coming in from India as a result. We see expansion of our large agriculture sector as a key part of diversification. And in fact, Candelia Business Group is in the process of developing a greenfield canola crushing operation in the Alberta town of Olds to export value-added product from Alberta to India. As you know, India, the largest importer of food around the world. And Alberta is a great producer of lentils and canola and other products in great demand there. I acknowledge that our friend Premwatsa at Fairfax is now the largest dealer of lentils in the world, and we've spoken to him about strategic opportunities for Alberta to become an even greater supplier to China. To India. When I talk about China, as I did earlier, here's one case in point. In the last couple of years, we have seen China arbitrarily impose restrictions on Canadian exports, of Alberta agricultural products in particular, of livestock, of canola, and other ag products. And the message that sent to me, which was that we should not be dependent on China as an export market. We need to redouble our efforts to diversify export markets, and that must start with India. By the way, you may know that when I was leader of the opposition here in Alberta, I visited India for, I think, my 5th or 6th visit 2 years ago. It was in the autumn of 2018. And it was my goal to renew my personal acquaintances with people in the senior leadership of Indian politics and business, in advance of, in the expectation of winning the last election. Then I was hoping to visit India this year. Of course, obviously, because of COVID, that's not been possible. But I do intend to return to convey these messages, to strengthen the confidence of Indian investors in the Canadian oil sands and in LNG, like the Indian Oil Company, and to pursue commercial relations. One part of our Alberta recovery plan is the creation of a new investment promotion agency called Invest Alberta. In the past, we have a network of about 16 trade promotion offices around the world, and their focus has tended to be on outbound export product promotion, which is important. But we are retooling our global network of offices to be more focused on inbound investment promotion, because we so desperately need to bring capital investment back to the Alberta economy. And I believe that's something, as I say, the CIF can help us with. Our recovery plan also involves reforms to Alberta's immigrant nominee program. As you know, when I was the federal immigration minister, I significantly expanded the size of the provincial nominee programs, and the Western provinces benefit from that most. It means that Alberta gets to select about 6,000 primary economic immigrants a year, people who typically come with dependents. We are doing deep reforms to that program in ways that I think will do a much better job of attracting highly educated DESIs, NRIs, who can start new businesses here. We're starting a new entrepreneur stream for people that want to buy or start businesses in Alberta. We are starting a new startup business scheme in particular that will focus on foreign student graduates of top US universities who cannot get their green cards in the US but want to begin startup businesses like in the digital sector here in North America. All of you know that there are tens of thousands of DESI students in the United States who are brilliant, some of the most brilliant young people in the world. Some of them are graduates of the Indian Institutes of Technology, that they went and did postgrad studies at American universities. Some of them are working for major tech companies. Many of them have ideas about startups. They've got venture capital lined up, but they cannot get the predictability of immigration status in the United States. And I know there are federal programs, but we are starting a super fast, dedicated stream focused exclusively on those foreign student grads who are in the United States. Come to Calgary, a 2-hour flight, direct nonstop to San Jose, to San Francisco. Lowest taxes, almost the lowest taxes in North America, by far the lowest in Canada. Best educated population. Super cheap office space available in downtown Calgary because of compressions in the oil and gas sector. a city, Calgary, ranked as having the highest quality of living in North America for 4 straight years by The Economist magazine. What's not to love? So these new immigration streams, I believe, are going to make a difference. Finally, let me say, since I want to take your questions, let me say that we need the Canada-India Foundation now more than ever. Under the Harper government, we saw, I thought, enormous progress in rebooting the Canada-India relationship. And I'm proud to say I was an active part of that. You know, when Prime Minister Harper came to office in 2006, just think about it. Canada-India relations had been more or less in the deep freeze for decades because of the nuclear question, because Canada had, I believe, inexplicably imposed sanctions on India simply for developing its strategic defense ability. I always thought, why in the world would a huge and proud democracy like India go unable to defend itself with neighbors like China in terms of strategic defense capability? So I personally pressed Prime Minister Harper very hard, and connected him to people like then National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Singh, who was then National Security Advisor Narayan, to meet with Stephen Harper to begin the process of the nuclear cooperation agreement, which was a key linchpin in unfreezing the relationship on the political side. For all of those decades prior to that, Canada's Asia policy had essentially been a China policy to the exclusion of India. Inexplicably, downgrading the relationship with the world's largest democracy, an English-speaking Commonwealth democracy. It made no sense. That's also why we unfroze the relationship with Gujarat after those years of it being blacklisted in the G7. And it's why we it's why we expanded Canada's diplomatic and trade promotion network in India. It's why we reformed our immigration programs to encourage immigration from all parts of India, to take a whole of India a strategy. It's also why we pursued with intention the Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Agreement and the Strategic Economic Partnership, the so-called Free Trade Agreement. I want to thank the Canada-India Foundation for having been a central part of those efforts. But I regret that here we are in 2020 and we still have not finalized the FIPA or that trade agreement. I hope that once we get back to something like normal post-COVID, that whoever is in the government of Canada will work with the Canada-India Foundation, certainly with our provincial government, to reboot the relationship, to regain lost momentum, to push forward on things like the FIPA and the Strategic Economic Partnership. Because here we are in 2020, and our bilateral trade is still a fraction of what it can and should be. The CIF has to be a critical part of that. And in so doing, you will have the absolute support of the government of Alberta. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so very much, Premier, for your excellent remarks and reinforcing the position of how important India is for Canada and for Alberta. And we are looking forward to working very closely with you. And Canada-India Foundation has witnessed over a decade and a half your out-of-box thinking, proactive approach. And we will be looking forward to, even opening a chapter of Canada-India Foundation in Alberta, and so that we can work very closely with your team in Invest Alberta team, and how some of the best entrepreneurs, we call Canada-India Foundation a network of network. So every member of ours brings a network of thousands of successful business entrepreneurs. I think it's a matter of just leveraging and capitalizing on that, and we're looking forward to working closely. So friends, let's begin with the Q&A session. So first, let me invite Dr. Lakshmanan. He's our past chair. He's a champion in clean technology, as well as the chair of most of our forum. He's the chair of our Canada-India Healthcare Forum coming up in 2021. Dr. Lakshmanan, over to you.
Greetings, Premier. Pleasure to be meeting you again.
Good to see you, Doctor.
I remember the days when we used to come to Ottawa, when you were there, our champion, CIF champion in Ottawa. I want to thank you on behalf of CIF, all the things that you did for us, promoting Canada-India relationship and Canada-India Foundation's presence in Canada. Thank you very much for all your help in making it happen. Premier, I've been living in Canada for nearly 45, 50 years. We have seen how Alberta has contributed to our Canadian economy. She has been a champion in the energy sector on innovation for years together, helping the whole Canada, lifting its quality of life through your contribution and helping us with what you have done with the energy sector, and also your spirit of entrepreneurship, your spirit of education. Alberta is a champion. Premier, now today, the world is changing. We do hear about all the other challenges, along with COVID, greenhouse gas emission, carbon footprint, and various things. Premier, with your kind leadership, whether you talk about Alberta, whether you talk about US, whether you talk about India, we continue to be there. US gets 65% of energy from fossil. India gets 65% from fossil. And Alberta is a champion working with our energy sector. Premier, you mentioned about digital technology, you mentioned about textiles. Recently, you also addressed alternate energy. You yourself getting into some newer technologies, working with some companies in the US on renewable energy. Premier, can you kindly give us your vision how Alberta, with its entrepreneur skill and your innovation and great experience on energy sector, how Alberta can continue to play a major role in our great country we call Canada, be it innovation, be it energy, be it, you mentioned about textiles, marrying digital technology with textile to make smart material for healthcare. There are a lot of things happening. Premier, kindly give us your opinion how we together in Canada can be prospering in the global village on trade and innovation.
Thank you so much, Lucky. Great to see you and hear from you. And thanks for all of your efforts over the years. First, that was a broad question, so I'll try to break it down into sort of two buckets. One, conventional energy, and then innovation. The two go together, obviously, because, I know that there's a view out there that oil and gas is a dirty old legacy industry and it's just low tech. And the truth is, the highest tech industry in Canada, I believe, is arguably oil and gas. The extraction of bitumen, the world-changing technologies like horizontal drilling, like fracking, came out of Alberta, because we do have, you go to Saudi Arabia, go to the OPEC countries, they have very simple, in a way, very, very simple, easily exploitable reservoirs. Conventional vertical drilling, boom, that's it. Here we've had to, for a number of reasons, we've had to develop far more innovative ways of extraction, and we've been world leaders in that. We've exported that technology. The shale boom in the United States largely came out of Canada and Canadian and Alberta drilling techniques. For example, I'll give you an example. The first automated drilling rig in the world has been developed by a small company south of Calgary. They're now selling dozens of those units every year to countries in the Middle East. So there's innovation within the conventional sector. That innovation is growing because of the climate imperative. We acknowledge that we must continuously reduce the greenhouse gas emission profile of our energy sector, partly, of course, because we share environmental responsibility, but also to ensure future access to capital, as there's a greater pressure emanating from the ESG metrics, environmental social governance metrics, being applied by major global financial institutions. So we must show them, and on that score, the carbon intensity of a barrel of bitumen oil produced in the Alberta oil sands has gone down by 30% since the year 2000. We are on track for a further 20% reduction. We are adopting technologies radically to reduce also emissions of NOx, SOx, and particulate to improve air quality and water usage. We're reducing water usage through things like moving from steam-assisted gravity drainage of bitumen to the use of environmentally safe solvents, moving from coal-fired power to natural gas cogen, much lower emitting natural gas-based energy for energy extraction. And a number of our largest energy companies, in fact, most of them have committed as an aspirational target to carbon net zero by 2050. Our carbon intensity for a barrel of Alberta heavy crude is lower than the global average. We don't get any credit for that. That didn't happen by accident. It happened through innovation. They don't have the same incentive to innovate in these ways in the OPEC producing countries. We do, and that reflects our sense of global responsibility. The next generation of technology is amazing. Part of this is being funded. By the way, Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America, perhaps the world, I don't know, but 12 years ago, we brought in a levy on major industrial emissions of greenhouse gas. And we use the revenues, 100% of those go to our technology innovation and emissions reduction program to help fund green technology. I'll give you an example. We have put in over $1 billion in partnership with Shell to the what's called the it's a carbon capture, utilization, and storage pilot east of Edmonton at their Scotford refinery, and it has led to enormous advances in CCS technology. Now we've added to that what we call the carbon trunk line that takes sequestered carbon from that refinery down into central Alberta and injects it into largely depleted conventional oil reservoirs in the sedimentary basin to assist with, and this is the cool part, to assist with enhanced oil recovery of the remaining reserves in those reservoirs at a net zero basis. And we believe this is massively scalable. We have huge methane, I should say hydrogen reserves here that we think so we've launched a new strategy and policy framework to hyperspeed the potential future multi-trillion-dollar hydrogen industry, particularly in the area of blue hydrogen. We have also a lot of rare earth minerals in Alberta that are needed for batteries, for example, including lithium, that we've never really bothered exploring for because we were able to depend on oil and gas. So the current crisis is forcing us to look at other natural resources which will help the energy transition. And then a lot of this stuff creates spin-offs in terms of small startups that are finding ways of better monitoring pipelines to reduce leaks and emissions, of optimizing the whole industry. So this is to say, I guess my point, Lucky, is that oil and gas is not in opposition to innovation, and nor is it in opposition to the environmental imperative. It's the wealth that has been generated from Canadian oil and gas that has helped to fund so much of that technological advancement. The University of Alberta Engineering Department, which has a lot of DESE professors and students, for example, is the largest engineering department in the country, and enormous programs there and at the University of Calgary that are funded by oil and gas companies to help them constantly to shrink their environmental impact and to move into more innovative industries. So I guess that's an overview of how the two are combined.
Thank you so much, Premier. And now may I request Norton Kothari. He's a great champion on the hospitality industry as well as in financial sector and many others. Norton, over to you. And may I request everyone to please, looking at, we have a lot of questions, to be very specific and brief so that we can address all the questions.
That applies to me too. I'm sorry about that long answer.
Okay, Norton, over to you.
I'm Norton Kothari from Kothari Group in Mississauga. We are in mortgage lending and hospitality as well as development business. We have some interest in Alberta. In fact, recently we bought one parcel of land in Edmonton in Leduc County for development. And of course, we had to stop the work because of COVID, but certainly we'll restart maybe next year. My question to you, Premier, is that, as you know, Alberta is home for a lot of desis. In your view, how can these desis, or what kind of role these desis can play in maintaining economic stability of Alberta?
Well, thank you very much, Norton. And thanks for that investment. And I hope you get out here and you're able to build soon. By the way, let me just say this. A reflection of Alberta's entrepreneurial culture is that we have had the least stringent public health measures in Canada. Until the last month or so, we also had amongst the lowest levels of transmission, COVID transmission and hospitalizations of the large provinces. Back in the spring, when your province, Ontario, suspended much of the construction and manufacturing sectors, those sectors continue to operate in Alberta. At the height of the spring restrictions, 85% of Alberta businesses, representing 88% of our workforce, were able to continue to operate. So I can assure you of this: if you come out here and start construction, you will not be interrupted by public health restrictions. We will not be shutting down or suspending the construction industry. Another thing I should have mentioned for investors and builders like you is that we are slashing government regulation. Part of our strategy is a 1/3 reduction in the number of regulatory requirements imposed by Alberta's government. We're 18 months into our government. We've already reduced that by 7%. It'll be down by 12% next spring. Our goal is to make Alberta the freest and fastest moving economy in terms of approvals, for example, and we are putting in place a policy framework to nudge municipalities to do the same thing. We've also given municipalities the ability to provide local property tax relief to incent new investment. And we're offering concierge service to investors to help them navigate through any regulatory or policy barriers that may exist. So those are general statements to say, please do more of that kind of investment. And I think with respect to the South Asian community, there's no, look, the most defining characteristic of Alberta is its entrepreneurial culture. And for me, one of the most defining characteristics of the Desi community is its entrepreneurial culture. That is a marriage made in heaven. And this is a natural place for risk takers and hard workers. And you mentioned food processing. We're one of the largest agricultural producers in North America. We want to hyperspeed our food processing sector, and we'd love to sit down with you and work with you on that, for example.
Thank you, Premier. And now may I request Anil Shah, our past chair, to come forward for his question. Anil bhai, over to you.
Premier, thank you very much. Congratulations. You are a very well-wisher of India. So we are going to be very good friends, always. You mentioned something about lithium and the rare earths. I am certainly interested in that industry. If you can have one of your assistants connect with me or with us, I would be very happy to work with him or her.
Yeah, which industry, Anil?
The rare earths. Lithium. You mentioned specifically lithium, the rare earths. In that business, because that's part of my metals industry, and that's where I am very much involved in. That's my core business. But to ask you a very specific question, I'm a little intrigued. You had a very slightly different approach to COVID-19 crisis. by emphasizing the need for people to make more personally responsible rather than micromanaging their lives. How has this philosophy gone down in Alberta, in your view?
Well, I would say over the past 9 months, this approach has worked very well with, I think, quite broad public support. That is to say, our focus has been on educating the public about responsible public health measures, empowering them with information and guidelines and equipment. We were the only government that provided, in our case, tens of millions of free masks, for example. And it involves an emphasis on personal and collective responsibility, as opposed to resorting to devastating lockdowns, as we've seen in many other jurisdictions. As Professor Gupta at Oxford University has said, lockdowns, the greatest victims of lockdowns are the poorest people. There's been a huge upward transfer of wealth as a result of lockdowns. And if we look at their effectiveness, well, people say, why don't you just do, a short circuit-breaking lockdown? The Australian state of Victoria told their citizens they were going to do that for 2 or 3 weeks, 12 weeks ago. And they are still in the midst of extreme measures of impairment of fundamental personal liberties and of their economy. My view is this. Through most of the past 9 months, we had the least stringent public health restrictions in Canada, but we had the lowest levels of infection, hospitalizations, and ICU-related fatalities of the large Canadian provinces of all 50 United States, and lower than almost all of the 35 European countries. So we did very well from March through to October. But in the past month, we have seen a significant spike in new cases, active cases, and hospitalizations, which is very concerning. And our approach has been to, where necessary, layer on targeted restrictions that are based on data in vectors of transmission that we know have really created spread. So we're focused, for example, on at-home social activities, because that we identify as responsible for 40% of the spread. But Norton, who's in the hospitality industry, we've said, look, only less than 1% of cases here are traceable to the restaurant industry. Why would we put out of hundreds of thousands of people out of work for an industry that has acted very responsibly to limit spread? So that is kind of characterizes our approach. Now, we will likely have to take some more restrictive measures given the current direction of things here, but because ultimately our goal is to protect the healthcare system from being overwhelmed while minimizing damage to the broader social, economic, mental, emotional, and physical health of society. I guess our point is we are not exclusively focused on COVID-19. We understand that for every policy in response to it, there are unintended consequences. So we've taken a holistic approach, and we believe that that's been effective.
Thank you, Premier. And now may I call Ray Gupta, who's again another champion of our hospitality industry, over 58 hotels. He's the single largest, I think, privately owned operator of the hospitality for his question. Ray, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ray Gupta. Thank you very much for the opportunity here. My question is, Premier Kenney, as a federal minister of immigration, you had brought about substantial changes, including better enforcement strategies. What are your views on continuing immigration in the time of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19?
Well, thanks for the good question, Ray. Obviously, immigration is largely suspended just for obvious reasons in terms of international travel restrictions right now. And I think we all have to respect that. Secondly, you know I am pro-immigration. I welcome more newcomers to Canada than any immigration minister in Canadian history. Having said that, I always maintained as Canada's immigration minister that we must ensure that immigration works both for Canada and for newcomers. It doesn't work if we bring people here at a time of a huge recession when they will only face unemployment or underemployment. The economic data, the research is clear that newcomers who arrive during a recessionary period have lower incomes and do less well throughout their entire lives than those who arrive during times of normal economic growth. Now, that's not to say that everybody that comes during recession is stuck in that trough, but because immigrants are the people at the newest arrived people in the labor market, they have the hardest time very typically getting jobs, getting that first job. And if they end up stuck in unemployment or in survival jobs because of a recession when they arrive here, that negatively affects their lifetime prospects. And secondly, I think I've always said it is critical that we maintain public support for immigration to Canada. Bringing huge numbers of newcomers here during a recession when there are high levels of unemployment, I believe, can jeopardize public support for immigration. The last thing I want is for Canada to see the kind of anti-immigrant sentiment that we've experienced in the US and much of Europe. So if I were the federal minister of immigration right now, I would be moderating downward immigration levels, still bringing in people with essential skills that we need. Don't get me wrong, not closing the door. But frankly, Pierre Trudeau did this. When we hit the big 1981 recession, he reduced immigration levels by 1/3 because he didn't want newcomers competing with jobs with the unemployed or newcomers being unemployed themselves. So this shouldn't be regarded as a politically contentious position. It was until recently the conventional policy setting of Canadian governments, which was in recessionary periods, you would reduce at least somewhat immigration intake. That's happening right now by virtue of the travel restrictions. But I guess that would be my cautionary point. And we've done that in Alberta in part by exercising our immigration agreement with the federal government to restrict access into the labor market for temporary foreign workers. I could not possibly justify to 300,000 unemployed Albertans that we would be bringing folks in from abroad on work permits, except for very specialized skill sets. So pro-immigration, smart immigration, fast immigration, that's why I reformed the system. That's why I'm trying to reform it in Alberta. But let's do it. Let's be smart about this in terms of getting the economy going before we bring hundreds of thousands of people every year in. As the federal government's proposing to do 400,000 new entrants into a labor market where we've got 10% unemployment, personally, I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Premier. And the next one is Sandeep Goel, President CEO of ICICI Bank. Sandeep, over to you.
Thanks, Satish. Premier Kenney, I'm deeply privileged to engage with you as I represent Canada India Foundation and I lead the ICICI Bank's Canadian franchise. We are the most immigrant-focused bank in Canada. Your key initiatives, which I think you touched upon as Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, set Canada on this wonderful path of cultural and economic diversity. As I always say that India needs what Canada has and vice versa. I think India is in need of energy, metals, and Canada is in need of talent. So my question is, how do you see this partnership with India going forward, both at federal as well as provincial level?
Well, thank you, Sandeep. And I'm excited to hear about your bank. I've always, for many years, been of the view that access to banking services is a critical part of the path to integration and success for newcomers, and especially for immigrant entrepreneurs. So thank you for being a leader in that area. And again, I'll just say in terms of Canada, India, we look, to be blunt, I think we had tremendous momentum in the relationship between Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister Modi. Unfortunately, some of that momentum has been lost. I'm not being partisan here. I think that's just objectively a fact. Notwithstanding, I think the best efforts of High Commissioner Patel, who's done a great job, and representing Canada in India. But let's face it, governments are distracted right now by COVID. But post-COVID, we've got to take a step back and reassess our international policy, our foreign policy, and our international commercial policy, which has, for the better part of 4 decades, been obsessively focused on the People's Republic of China. Now, China is a great country. It's a great people, and it is an enormous market, and we have to deal with that constructively. But I hope that recent events have disabused any Canadian government that the Communist Party of China is somehow a friendly or benign foreign influence. This is a government that has kidnapped Canadian diplomats, that has arbitrarily imposed restrictions on Canadian exports, that has engaged in grossly unfair trading practices, in massive scale of industrial espionage and interference in Canadian domestic politics, not to mention its own appalling human rights record. And so the notion that we have put all of our eggs in the Chinese trade basket, arguably, the current government has, while continuously neglecting the potential for India, makes no sense. So I really do hope that at a high strategic level, there will be a reorientation towards India post-COVID, and I will certainly be an advocate for that.
Thank you, Premier. Our next one is Pankaj Dave, our past co-convener as well. Pankaj, over to you. Just unmute yourself.
So, good morning, Premier. And it was a very nice presentation. You just made it. And my one question would be that given the fact that all the 3 directions seem to be closed and locked, like pipeline to the US to West Coast through BC and the energy East Coast pipeline. So with limited options to pump more of Alberta's oil, do you see a slow death of the industry in the coming years, or how you envisage the future of oil and this fossil fuel industry in Alberta?
Thanks. Thank you very much, Pankaj. So the International Energy Agency projects, now I'm going to use some pre-COVID projections, okay? Then I'll come to post-COVID. International Energy Agency projects that in 2040, the world will likely be consuming 107 million barrels per day of crude oil. Pre-COVID, the world was consuming about 100 million barrels. So in other words, their standard projection was for continued growth in demand over the next 20 years. They also produce a bearish scenario, which would be based on the entire world fully complying with their Paris Climate Treaty targets, which I think is frankly highly unlikely. But if that were to happen, they are projecting, I think, about 75 million barrels per day. So about a 25% decline from where we were pre-COVID. Here's our in the short term, our view is that global demand for fuel, for energy, will recover post-COVID. Obviously, when planes start running again and the global economy is back at full tilt. So we expect global demand to recover to 100 million barrels per day, but there will be, by 2022-23, a significant constraint on supply. Why? Because with low prices in the past 5 years and catastrophically low prices in the last 9 months, there's been a huge withdrawal of capital investment from upstream oil and gas exploration work. And the way the industry works is, basically the fuel that we'll be consuming 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, we have to be exploring for that fuel right now. So there's a constant cycle of upstream investment for exploration to ensure future supply. Right now, that cycle is largely broken down. What I'm trying to say is this: when we get back into full post-COVID recovery, when the demand is there, we are going to experience a global supply shortage because of little or no investment in upstream exploration. What does that mean? Significant increases in prices. And so we are fairly bullish about midterm price projections for the industry. And we have a very capital efficient industry in Canada. Why? Because when they spend billions of dollars on one of those big oil sands mines, or what they call a SAGD in situ project, that's where they use steam under subterranean steam to extract oil from the oil sands. When they do that, those projects are there producing for 30 years or more. Unlike the kind of churn and burn of capital required in the US shale industry or in much of the Middle East. Long story short, I think we are set to continue to have a strong industry. Yes, over time, global demand and consumption will diminish. But our goal as a country should be that the last barrel of oil consumed in the world should be a Canadian barrel, as opposed to an OPEC barrel. And I guess that's my key point here. As long as there is global demand for that kind of energy, and by the way, until we can figure out how to replace plastic products that are made from petrochemicals, not going to happen. Until we can figure out how to operate airplanes on pixie dust or something, it's not going to happen. So as long as there is global demand for that kind of energy, it should come from a liberal democracy with the highest human rights, labor, and environmental standards on earth. That is our premise. But in order to do it, we need to get pipelines built.
Thank you, Premier. We have only a few more questions, which will wrap up quickly. Next one, Wes Sharma, a technology champion. Wes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Satish, and hello, Premier Kennedy. It has been an immense pleasure to actually listen to you all throughout the event today. So thank you very much for joining us and spending some time. Well, as Satish said, I'm Wes Sharma. I'm on the Board of Governors for the Canada-India Foundation. So here's my question for you today. So as recently as November 2nd, if I'm right with the date here, Alberta introduced a new pilot program, the first actually in the entire country of Canada, that is to reduce the quarantine days for travelers landing in one of the Albertan airports. So I'm curious to know, Premier Kenney here, on what does the success of the program looks like ever since it has been launched?
Thank you so much, Vase. I appreciate the question. Yes, the pilot program is one example of our real innovation in the COVID response. Let me just say, like, for example, we have maintained the highest per capita levels of testing in Canada, almost the highest in the world through the past 9 months. We were the best equipped in terms of PPE in Canada, if not North America, partly because we have a brilliant head of procurement in our health department called Jitendra Prasad, who, being a typical entrepreneurial desi, had developed fantastic relationships with suppliers and managed on the first rumors of a virus in Wuhan to surge supplies before other countries did. A great example of Indian entrepreneurial spirit in our public service. And we were the first province to roll out a online self-assessment application, the first province to have a tracing application. We've had the best contact tracing system in the country. Right now, it's honestly overwhelmed, but it's been the most effective. And another thing that we did first, and the only province, is the pilot program for international travelers you've mentioned. So what this does, if you arrive at Calgary Airport or our major land port of entry from the United States, you can enroll in this program. You take a rapid test. There's a fee associated with it at the airport upon arrival. It just takes a minute to do it. You enroll in the program. You are required then to go into quarantine until you get your test results back, and that's about 36 hours, which is if you're negative, you're free to go. We ask that you check back and do a second test, I think a week later. But this means that we've effectively reduced the Canadian quarantine for international passengers arriving from the standard 14 days to effectively about 36 hours. So far, well, as of last week, we'd had about 3,000 people participate, and 1.3% tested positive at the airport, which is great for them to know right away. They know, and that helps us to contain the spread. And yeah, so far the program's working really well. We would encourage the federal government to work with other provinces on rolling this out. They've said, though, they just want to see how the Alberta pilot works first. We'll be expanding it to the Edmonton airport in, I believe, February. So tell your overseas friends, if they want to come to Canada, come to Alberta.
Thank you, Premier. The next one is...
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mike Mehta, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Satish Bhai. And good morning to you, sir. It's strange you mentioned regarding beside energies, lentils. So as a CEO of the Exim Canada, we are one of the major exporters of your lentils, peas, seeds, and the beans. When you make your next visit to India, maybe you can help the industry by asking them to reduce their duty and some of the regulation on lentils. But thank you. So my question to you, what are some of the ideas being discussed to ensure the income of average Albertans in the event of the further decline in oil revenue?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. The answer to your question is we simply have to get growth back to our economy because, you know, we are in an economic crisis and there's just no beating around the bush. But that is why I talked about our Alberta recovery plan. It's why we've significantly reduced business tax rates. We are slashing regulatory red tape, bringing in policies like the Innovation Employment Grant to drive our tech sector, our innovation sector. It's why we are now pursuing a minerals strategy for things like lithium and helium and uranium and so much more that will be in greater demand in the future. It's why we are pursuing innovation in agriculture. You'll be interested to know, Mike, as an ag exporter, that we've just invested $850 million in collaboration with local irrigation authorities in the largest modernization of Canadian irrigation infrastructure in 6 decades to expand the area of productive farmland in southern Alberta, to increase yields and to reduce water usage. So we'll be producing, and by the way, on ag, as you know, because of things like seed technology and smarter farming practices, we are getting record yields. This will be, we believe, even though we had bad weather in some areas, the largest overall grain and oil seeds yield in the history of the Canadian prairies. So we see agricultural innovation, you know, TELUS is investing billions in wireless technology to assist the agriculture industry in continuing to improve yields. And most of that is being invested in Alberta. So we're bullish on the future here. You know, I always say Albertans are natural optimists. They just need a reason for their optimism. That's why we've rolled out this recovery plan.
Thank you, Premier. And I see Ajit Someshwar. Thank you for joining, and a great thought leader for Canada India Foundation. I'll come to you. Before that, let me call Sunita Vyas, our co-convener, for her question. Sunita, over to you. Sunita?
Mute. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Jason Kenney, for coming in today and speaking with all of us. My name is Sunita Vyas, and as you can see, I am part of the education network here in Ontario. The first thing I want to tell you is that we really, really miss you in Ontario. My next question is this. My question would have been, what would be your plans to encourage investment in Alberta? But I think you've already addressed that. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a sector-specific question. This is something that we've been doing for over 2 years now, but it didn't get to any fruition. Regarding Bollywood industry, you already know it's such a huge revenue-making industry in India. My question to you would be that if producers wanted to come and shoot in Alberta, which is so beautiful, what kind of incentives do you offer? And if somebody wants to set up a film studio, what kind of incentives do you offer to the producers back home in India?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sunita. I was actually going to mention this in my remarks, but neglected to. So in my visit to India 2 years ago, I actually met with a number of leading Bollywood producers to pitch Alberta as a venue. And so first of all, the biggest advantage that we have is our scenery. It's our locations. We have the most majestic Rocky Mountains, for example. And I talked to one of the producers who was a high school and college chum of my minister, Prasad Panda. I talked to him about, using the Canadian Rockies as a venue, as a location. And he started imagining right away an entire film, a Bollywood film based on a cop story of chasing a bad guy through the Canadian Rockies, a kind of Bollywood version of the old 1920s movies that Hollywood shot up here. I thought it was fantastic. So we actually have had some small Indian film productions here, but we really think we could scale that up. We are just about, stay tuned for in the next couple of weeks, we'll be announcing an expansion of our film tax credit program to compete on a level playing field with Ontario and British Columbia in terms of incentives. And we do have a large soundstage here in Calgary. We hope to attract investment to create more. And we, our Minister of Jobs and the Economy is very focused on that. And one last point, during COVID, we have been very innovative in creating commercial bubbles that are COVID safe. One example of that was our hosting of the NHL playoffs and finals in Edmonton. We created a perfect functional hockey bubble to produce basically a television product, which was the NHL finals and playoffs. And so we're pitching now to the film industry, because we're largely shut down in BC and Ontario and Hollywood. And we've been more flexible about how we apply the rules. So we're willing, and we've got this travel pilot that I just mentioned that reduces significantly the quarantine requirement. So right now, in the next few months, we believe this is a great place in which to do productions, but also stay tuned for the announcement about the expansion of our film and television tax credit.
Excellent, Premier. I must mention that Sunita's brother is a very prominent, well-known producer out of Bollywood, and we are targeting Sunita to champion that cause. Ajit, thank you for joining, and I would like you to share some of your thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can see me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Minister, for Premier, for your wonderful contribution to today's Zoom call. I remember the first time I met you was as convener of Canada India Foundation, was in the office of BLG, where we had a particular complaint about an advisor being appointed the Prime Minister of the region. Right? And the other observation is the second time we met was obviously at the CIF annual awards, the first of them. And I always believe that the cause of Harper not being elected for the third election was that your approach to the 905 was not being followed. So anyways, two things that I believe may be of some use to Alberta. One is that countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia have developed local bonded storage in India to the tune of millions of barrels, right? And you can do the same when you have the ability to export oil and gas and agricultural products and also rare earths to India. You can create your own bonded storage under a private-public partnership program. I think on your next trip to India, I think you should definitely discuss that. That way you will have a captive market and the market price will be the market price, but at least you'll have a product there. The last request that I have from you is we want to extend our franchise deeply into Alberta, and if your office can give us the names of leading daisies, as you say, right, and we can invite them on a Zoom or a telecon and tell them exactly what we do, they can extend the family of Canada India Foundation in Alberta, and we'll be close at hand to you.
Thank you, Ajit. Great to see you. Great to hear from you. And I'll take the first point as not a question, but as good advice. I take that on board. And on the second, I really appreciate the invitation, and I will get back to CIF leadership with names of some key contacts. I can already start thinking of people who I know would be very keen on being supportive. First person that pops into mind is Prem Singhmar in Edmonton, who is a very large land developer and one of our most successful hoteliers, and Radhi Gupta, the largest home builder one of the largest in Alberta. There's a long list of folks who would be perfectly aligned with CIF, and I'd love to connect you guys, because I think CIF has never really landed in Alberta. I'd like to change that.
Thank you.
Yes, Premier, we were waiting for your leadership, and then we will be landing soon. And we have so many other questions, but I think time is limited. I want to acknowledge some of our other board of governors who joined, Vinod Vyas, Chirag Shah. Thank you for taking time out to join. And now let me invite Ritesh Malik, our national convener, for the concluding remark and vote of thanks. Ritesh, over to you.
Premier Jason Bhai, although it was not the same, but we felt the same warmth and energy we are used to when you frequently used to visit GTA. And I'm talking about your energy, not Alberta energy here. And hopefully we will get to meet you in person very soon. On behalf of Canada India Foundation and the entire fraternity of Indo-Canadians here, I extend a very warm and sincere, heartfelt thanks to you for sharing with us your Alberta vision today. At CIF, we have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated members who are very passionate for robust Canada-India ties and to flourish this relationship 360 degrees. Special thanks to all our members. Today, we would like to extend our commitment at Canada India Foundation to play a very active and constructive role in marrying resource strength of Alberta with market of India. And you know, we Indians believe in long-lasting, successful and happy marriages. So thanks to all the media partners for our webinar speaker series, especially Pravasi Media and Channel Y for covering this program live today. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you and good day. Thank you, Premier Kenney.
Thank you so much. Bahut dhanwad. Thank you.